In the fall of 1907, a small woman walked into a New York bank and asked for everything, not a withdrawal, everything. Close to $1 million, the whole of her account, handed over in cash. She wanted it in large bills and gold certificates, nothing that leaned on a bank staying open or a banker staying honest. She dropped the money into a netted bag, pulled it shut, and walked back out into the panic gripping the city. Then she disappeared. For the next 24 years, almost nobody saw her face. She took 2 small rooms in a hotel near Herald Square and shut the door. When it opened again, in the spring of 1931, the people who stepped inside found an old woman living in filth. She was eating crackers, tipping the errand boy a dime, telling him it was the last money she had in the world. She was sitting on a fortune the whole time. I have gone through more of these Gilded Age fortunes than I can easily count. The heirs, the swindlers, the ones who threw it all away at the card table. I had never come across anyone who did what this woman did. She did not lose her money. She did not trust it to anyone. Instead, she turned it into cash and hid it on her own body. The world had been told her name was Ida Wood, widow of a congressman, a Southern belle who had danced with a future king and once met a president. Every piece of that story would later come apart in the hands of the men who tried to prove it. What they found. The men who came through the door on March 5th, 1931, were expecting very little. A sister had died. An old woman needed a doctor. The lawyers who arrived that evening had handled plenty of quiet endings in shabby rooms, and this looked like one more. Then they took a proper look around. Nobody had cleaned the place in years. She had kept everything. Rolled up string, used wrapping paper, stacks of old newspapers that had grown into walls of their own. No cleaner had been let inside since before the Great War, and the smell hit the men before anything else did. Her sister's body lay on the parlor couch, under a sheet. The living woman barely came up to 5 feet. She cannot have weighed much past 70 pounds. She was nearly deaf, and age had bent her almost double. Her face was the strange part. It was pink and almost unlined, far younger than the rest of her. For hours every day she had worked petroleum jelly into her skin. One of the lawyers said later that you could still see the beauty she had once been. Her name, she told them, was Ida Wood. She was 93, and she mentioned, almost in passing, that she had a little money in the room. That was the understatement of the decade. The first real find came out of an old shoebox. Packed flat inside sat $247,000 in cash, most of it in bills of $1,000 and $5,000. The men counted it twice. Not one of them had ever held that much paper in his hands. It was nowhere near all of it. Days later, a nurse watching Ida sleep noticed an odd shape sewn into her nightgown. They opened the lining and found an oilcloth pocket pressed flat against her skin. Inside was $500,000, every bill a $10,000 note. She had slept on it night after night, worn against her body for years. The search went on for weeks after that. A diamond necklace worth $40,000 turned up in a box of stale crackers. There were gold certificates so old they carried dates from the 1860s. There were bonds, railroad stock, jewelry she had not looked at in a generation. When the counting was done, the woman in that filthy room was found to be worth almost $1 million. In today's money, that is more than 20 million. Sit with the timing of it for a second, because I think it is the whole reason we still talk about her. This was the worst stretch of the Great Depression. Banks were shutting their doors. Men who had run businesses were selling apples on the corner. People were lining up for bread. And a few floors above one of those streets, an old woman had a fortune in cash stitched into her clothes. She ate crackers, and told the bellboy she was down to her last dime. The papers went wild for it, and I understand why. The whole thing sounds made up. But the money, oddly, was the simple part. She was rich. Nobody could argue with that anymore. The real questions started here, and not one person in that room could answer them. Why would a woman worth $1 million live like this? Why lock herself away for 24 years? And what had frightened her so badly that she turned every dollar into cash and gold? She hid it in cracker tins and coat linings, as if a bank were a thing to run from. There was one more question too, quieter than the others, and it would take years to settle. An elegant widow, a Southern belle, the wife of a congressman, a woman the society pages had once followed closely. The lawyers taking down her story that night had no reason yet to doubt a single word of it. Almost none of it was real. The woman who trusted no bank. Years before she vanished, Ida Wood started giving up her things. Not to charity, for cash. For decades, she had lived surrounded by fine things. The furniture, the oil paintings, the heavy tapestries that told a visitor a wealthy woman lived here. One by one, she sold them off. Sculptures, art, the trappings of a Fifth Avenue life. All of it turned into money she could fold and carry. By 1900, she was a widow. Her husband, the congressman, was in the ground, and the fortune he had built and nearly gambled away belonged to her alone. Most women in her position would have handed it to a bank and lived quietly off the interest. Ida did the opposite. She trusted no bank. She never really had. Then came the panic of 1907. Over a few weeks that fall, the country's banks came close to falling apart. It began with a failed scheme to corner the stock of a copper company. When the scheme collapsed, it pulled down the banks tied to it. Depositors panicked. The Knickerbocker Trust Company, one of the largest in the city, could not pay everyone who lined up outside, and it closed its doors. Fear jumped from one institution to the next. For a few days, it looked like the whole structure might come down. What saved it was a single man. J.P. Morgan gathered the leading financiers in his private library. He refused to let them leave until they agreed to hold the system up with their own money. The panic passed, but Ida had seen enough. She did not wait to learn whether her bank would be one of the lucky ones. At the height of the crisis, she walked into the Guarantee Trust Company and asked them to hand over her whole account. Every dollar of it. She wanted the biggest bills the bank had, and gold certificates, the kind of paper that did not lean on any institution staying open. An officer there never forgot it. She swept the cash into a bag, he said, and told him plainly that she was tired of everything. Then she walked out. I find that line strangely modern. Tired of everything. A woman with close to $1 million turning her back on the world because she had simply had enough of it. She was 69 that year. Where she went was a plain hotel a few steps off Herald Square within earshot of Broadway. She rented a pair of rooms on an upper floor and settled the bill months ahead, always in cash. With her came the two women who had shared her whole strange life, her sister Mary, and a younger woman she called her daughter, Emma. They asked the hotel for nothing. No cleaner would come in. No sheets would be changed. Meals arrived at the door and were passed through a narrow gap, and the rent went back to the front desk the same way. Everything else, the three of them would do without. Then Ida shut the door. She was not ill, and she was not out of her mind. She had a fortune in the room, and a clear reason behind every choice she made. For years, she had watched the men around her lose everything at the card table. Now she had watched the banks fail in a single week, and she had settled on one rule. The only money worth having was money she could see, touch, and keep within reach. I still find the discipline of it hard to picture. Nobody could have known, on that first quiet evening, how long the door would stay shut. A quarter of a century is a long time to keep a secret. It is a long time to keep 3 women fed and unseen in the heart of the biggest city in the country. And it is a long time to lie down each night beside a fortune and touch none of it. But that was the bargain she had struck with herself. Safety, traded for everything else. She meant to keep it to the end. The letter that started everything. The letter went out in the spring of 1857. It was addressed to a man who owned a newspaper and moved easily among the powerful in New York. The writer was a young woman he had never heard of, and by the standards of the day, it was an outrageous thing for a woman to send. She had come to the city not long before. She had very little to her name, and even less of a past that anyone could trace. Where she came from, she would not say. That silence was deliberate. New York, in the 1850s, was crowded with people reinventing themselves, and she meant to do it more completely than any of them. The first thing she built was a name. She would be Ida Mayfield. It was a name with a soft, genteel sound to it, nothing that hinted at work or want. To go with it, she invented a father, a Louisiana sugar planter, and a mother with a line running back to Scottish nobility. That made her a daughter of the plantation South, a belle who had come north for culture and company. The father was a fiction. So was the plantation, and so was the noble blood. But Ida understood the city she was trying to enter. It wanted to be charmed, and she was very good at charming it. No one was going to travel south to prove her a liar. As long as she looked the part and never slipped, the story would stand. She prepared for the role like a scholar. She bought the newspapers, not for the news, but for the society columns, and read them the way a broker reads the market. Who dined with whom? Which families counted and which did not? How the old families sneered at the newly rich, and the newly rich sneered at everyone beneath them. She was learning the rules of a world she had not been born into, so that she could slip inside it. The way in was a man. His name was Benjamin Wood. He owned a New York paper called the Daily News, and he stood close to real power. His brother Fernando ran the city as its mayor. Benjamin was married, a good deal older than Ida, and he had a well-known weakness for pretty young women. He was, in plain terms, exactly the door she had been looking for. So she wrote to him. The letter was reckless. She presented herself to a married stranger and offered him her company for as long as he might want it. She described herself as good-looking, though she was careful not to oversell it. What she truly had, she suggested, was a mind. At the end, she left an address for his reply. He replied. When Benjamin Wood met the woman behind the letter, he did not find a great beauty. He found something more useful to her than beauty. She carried herself with total assurance. When she talked about Louisiana and her fine family, it was as if she had grown up with them. Quick, watchful, she never once broke character. He was charmed, and from that day she had her foothold. For the next few years, she climbed on his arm. She turned up at the theatres and restaurants where the best people gathered. Every afternoon, a carriage carried her up Fifth Avenue, past the places where the right people would see her. She sat, straight-backed, raised her parasol against the light, and gave nobody a reason to doubt she belonged. The wives in those rooms watched her warily. Their husbands could not look away. Of all the bold moves in this story, that letter might be my favourite. The proof that it had all worked came in the fall of 1860. That year, the Prince of Wales, the young man in line for the British throne, crossed the ocean for a tour of America. New York held a great ball in his honour, and every important household fought for a place near him. When the dancing began, the future king led Ida onto the floor. I want you to picture that for a moment. A woman who had entered the city with nothing, now dancing with the heir to a throne and passing without a slip. If he noticed she was anything other than what she claimed, he did not let on. For the length of that dance, the invention was flawless. It was the performance of her life, and it was only the start of what she meant to take from the world she had talked her way into. A marriage built like a contract. In 1867, after 10 years of waiting, Ida got what she had come for. Benjamin's wife, Delia, had been ill for a long time. When she died that year, Benjamin did the thing Ida had been patient enough to let him choose on his own. He married her. He was in his late 40s. She was 29. It was a small, quiet wedding, and the gossip columns that had once trailed her every move hardly looked up. She was Mrs. Benjamin Wood now. The doors that had opened only part way for a congressman's companion swung wide for his wife. But the ring did not make her safe, and safety was the one thing Ida truly wanted. Her new husband had a habit that could swallow a fortune whole. There was one thing Benjamin could not leave alone, and it was not his wife or his newspaper. It was the bet. He gambled the way other men breathed. Cards, the track, the roulette wheel, a stake on almost anything with an outcome. He was a fixture at John Morrissey's gambling house on Lower Broadway, where the city's rich men went to lose money in comfort. Some nights he lost badly. Other nights he won. And when he won big. The wild swings never seemed to scare him the way they should have. One night became legend in those rooms. Deep in a losing streak, out of cash and refusing to fold, Benjamin put down the one thing he had left. He staked the newspaper itself. The paper that was his living and his pride rode on a single hand of cards. He won it back and kept it. But a man who would gamble his livelihood on one hand was a man whose money could be gone by morning. Another night, he came home flush. He woke Ida, spread $100,000 across the bed, and made her count it, pleased as a boy. She did not try to fix him. She had seen enough of the world to know you cannot argue a gambler out of gambling. So instead of fighting the habit, she did something colder and far smarter. She made a deal with him. The terms were simple, and they all favored her. Whatever he won, she took half. Whatever he lost was his burden and his alone. She would not pay what he owed. She would not step in on a bad night. His good luck she would share. His ruin she would leave entirely to him. I have read this deal a dozen times, and it still strikes me as the coldest thing in the whole story. A wife charging her own husband for the right to lose. She enforced it like a lender. When her husband went to gamble, Ida often went along and waited outside. If he walked out a winner, she was there to take her half on the spot before it could drift back onto a table. If he walked out a loser, she billed him a fee for the time he had made her wait. I keep coming back to the picture of her out there on the curb, running the numbers while the men inside chased their luck. Everything that came to her, she held herself, titled to no one but her. When Benjamin needed cash, he borrowed it from her, and she charged him interest to do it. Any property she bought, she put in her name alone. Slowly and steadily, the fortune slid from his side of the ledger to hers. After his worst nights, he sent her apologetic little notes, one of them signed off, with rueful humour, from her unlucky husband, Ben. By the time they had been married 10 years, the gap was plain. His money came and went with his luck. Hers only climbed. She was becoming, quietly, and in her name alone, a rich woman, while the man beside her spent his way slowly downhill. He did not seem to mind. Maybe he saw it as a fair price for peace at home. Maybe he simply loved the game too much to care where the money landed. But the real power in that marriage had changed hands. Benjamin kept the fame and the titles and the byline. Ida kept the cash. And she had built the whole arrangement on one hard lesson she had learned long before she ever met him. She would not trust her future to any man, not even the one she had married. The newspaper, nobody could keep the... Twice in its life, the newspaper that made the Woods rich came within a breath of being worth nothing. Benjamin had bought the Daily News around 1860, and he turned it into a weapon. It was the voice of his brother Fernando's political machine, and it backed a cause that would soon put the whole family on the wrong side of history. The Woods were peace Democrats, the anti-war men history would remember as Copperheads. They opposed the war, opposed Lincoln, and their paper said so loudly, siding openly with the South, while the country tore itself apart. The government did not let that pass. In 1861, federal authorities barred the news from the mail. For a paper of that era, that was close to a death sentence. Without the mail, it could not reach most of its readers or collect most of its money. It went dark for roughly a year and a half. During the silence, Benjamin, with time on his hands and a business in ruins, sat down and wrote a novel. I did not know before this story that the government could simply mail a newspaper out of existence. But that is very nearly what happened. The News survived. It came back after the war and grew into a paper of real weight, and its owner grew with it. Benjamin became a man other important men wrote to. One letter, kept among Ida's things for 70 years, came from Charles Dickens. He had written to Benjamin in 1867. Then came the second near death, and this one he brought on himself. His luck at the tables finally caught up with him. By 1879, his debts had climbed past what he could carry, and he had to file for bankruptcy. To stay afloat, he signed over a large share of the business, 43%, to a publisher named William L. Brown. Brown propped it up and remained a partner until the end. Benjamin held on to a piece of the thing he had built, but he no longer fully owned it. The gambler had gambled away part of his own newspaper after all, not in one reckless night, but slowly, across years. Benjamin Wood died in February of 1900 at 79. The death notices were generous. They recalled his decades in newspapers and politics, and his time in Congress. What they did not dwell on was the state of his money. When his estate was examined, it turned out he owned almost nothing, no real estate, little property of any real value. The famous publisher had died, on paper, a man of modest means. That was not because the money was gone. It was because the money was hers. And now, so was the paper. I still find what she did next hard to believe. She did not simply sell up and walk away. For a time, she ran the thing herself. She edited and published a New York daily, a widow in her 60s, in a trade run almost entirely by men. In 1900, in Widow's Black, she sat at the head of a newspaper in New York itself. Then, in 1901, she sold it. The price was more than $250,000, a fortune on its own. The paper that Benjamin had bought, armed, nearly lost to the government and slowly gambled down, left the family for good. Ida turned it into cash, the same as she had done with the furniture and the paintings and everything else. By then, the pattern of her whole life was plain. Anything that could be sold, she sold. Anything that could become money she could hold, she made into money. That newspaper had been the last large piece of her husband still standing. Now it was gone too, changed into bills and certificates like all the rest. She was free of him, and free of the past. Everything she owned could now be counted and carried and hidden. For a woman who trusted nothing she could not see, that was the entire point. Life behind the locked door. Somewhere in that room sat a block of Union Pacific Railroad stock worth about $175,000. For a dozen years, Ida did not collect the dividends on it. Think about what that means. The stock paid her, year after year, just for owning it. All she had to do was cash the checks. She let them go. Here was someone who had turned every possible thing into money her whole life. Now she let a steady stream of easy income pile up untouched. Cashing it would have meant contact with the world beyond her door, and that was a price she would not pay. That is the truest picture I can give you of how she lived after 1907. The three of them fell into a routine that almost never changed. The food never varied from week to week. Crackers and bread, coffee, canned milk, a little bacon and eggs cooked on a burner set up in the bathroom. Once in a while, raw fish. And strangely, good Havana cigars, about the only comfort any of them allowed themselves. It was the diet of people counting every penny, ordered by a woman who could have bought the hotel outright. Mary was their one link to the outside. Food came in through a gap she opened and closed fast. The rent she carried down to the desk herself. When a curious clerk asked after Mrs. Wood, Mary told him the old lady was fine and wanted for nothing. For years, that was the only contact between the suite and the rest of the building. Emma had faded almost to nothing. Her whole life had been spent following Ida, and she followed her into this silence too. The endless paper she sorted into stacks, clothes no one outside would ever see, she stitched and mended. Mostly she waited. They were all waiting, though not one of them could have said for what. Outside, the world moved on without them. Ida kept up with it the only way she still would, through the papers dropped outside her door. The newspapers brought her the war in Europe, the trenches full of dying boys. After it came a loud, giddy decade of jazz and soaring markets. Then, in October of 1929, the crash arrived in those same papers and swept all of it away. She must have taken a bleak kind of satisfaction from that. Every bank that failed, every fortune that vanished overnight, proved the thing she had believed for decades. Her money was not caught up in any of it. It sat in the room with her, in cash and gold, where nothing on Wall Street could reach it. But there was one thing her money could not hold off. Emma had never been strong, and the years locked inside had worn her thin. By 1928, she was sick, too sick for even Ida to pretend otherwise. Not once in more than 20 years had an outsider crossed that threshold. Now a doctor did. What he found appalled him, a dying woman in surroundings no person should have to live in. They carried Emma out to a hospital ward. She did not come back from it. The paperwork recorded her once again as the Woods' daughter, and under that name, she went into the ground. The lie she had lived held all the way into the grave. There is something in that I find genuinely sad. Whoever Emma really was, she never once got to be that person, not even on her own headstone. That left the two of them. Ida was past 90 by now. Mary had reached her 80s. The two of them carried on, though the rooms were quieter with one of them gone. Her fortune stayed hidden. That door stayed shut. Two old women, a locked door, and a fortune nobody else knew was there. That had become the whole of Ida's world, and as far as anyone could tell, it was exactly the world she wanted. The prisoner of Herald Square. It took a death to open the door. Mary was the last of the three still able to deal with the outside world. When she fell ill early in 1931, Ida was left with no one to send. So she opened the door herself and called for help. Within hours, strangers were standing in the middle of the world she had sealed off for a generation. And from that moment on, the control she had held so tightly began to slip out of her hands. The story broke fast, and it broke everywhere. A recluse widow, 93 years old, found in filth with a fortune stitched into her clothes. In the worst year of the Depression, it was exactly the kind of tale a hungry public could not resist. Reporters set up outside the hotel and waited. They slipped money to bellboys for any scrap of gossip and aimed cameras at anyone going in or out. They hunted down old society photographs of Ida as a young woman, elegant and unreadable. Those ran beside headlines about the recluse and her hidden gold. Through all of it, Ida gave them nothing. When a reporter got close, she turned her face away and said not a word. She had held her tongue for 70 years, and she was not about to lose it now over a newspaperman. For someone who had worked for decades to make sure no one looked at her, it was a nightmare come true. Then came the relatives. For all those years, no one had claimed her. Now that there was money in it, family appeared. Otis Wood, a son of the old Mayor Fernando, stepped forward. So did a son of Benjamin's from his first marriage. These were not warm reunions. The men who came were interested in the estate. Their first move was to have the old woman declared unfit to manage it. They got their wish. In September of 1931, a court ruled that Ida Wood was incompetent to handle her own affairs. Just like that, the woman who had outwitted bankers, lawyers, and her own gambling husband lost control of her fortune. 60 years of holding the reins ended by a single ruling. Others would decide now. Others would sign the papers, count the money, and choose where she lived. There is a bitter symmetry to it that I cannot look away from. She had trusted no one with her money her whole life. At the very end, the law took it out of her hands and gave it to strangers. They moved her down one floor, into rooms that could be watched and cleaned and managed. She did not go quietly. There were tears, and there were questions. Over and over she told them she could take care of herself, that she always had, that she needed no one. To the people handling her case, it looked like the confusion of a very old woman. To Ida, it must have felt like being robbed of the last thing she had. At one point, she made it to a window and called down into the street. She cried out that she was a prisoner, that they were holding her against her will, that somebody should come and get her out. Of all of it, that is the image I cannot shake. A woman of 93 at a window, $1 million to her name, screaming to strangers below that she was a captive. In a way, she was right. She had built her whole life around one idea. Safety meant holding on, letting no one in, trusting only what she could lock away herself. For a long time it had worked. It had made her rich, and it had kept her hidden. But the walls that kept the world out had become the walls that shut her in. When they finally came down, there was nothing left for her to control. 1,000 strangers claiming blood. In life, almost no one had wanted Ida Wood. In death, more than 1,000 strangers came forward claiming her blood. She died on the 12th of March, 1932, in a private sanatorium, 94 years old. She never got her control back. The woman who had run her own affairs for 60 years spent her last months as a ward of the court. Strangers counted her money. Strangers arranged her days. Then she was gone. And the moment she was gone, the real fight began. What set it off was simple. A fortune of around $1 million sat in the court's hands, its owner dead and her family a blank. To a great many people, that looked like money waiting for whoever could tell the best story about it. So they came, and they kept coming. The final count, is hard to believe. More than 1,100 people stepped forward to claim a piece of the estate. They came from every corner of the country, and a few from across the ocean. Each one carried a story about why some of the dead woman's money was rightfully theirs. They came in every variety. Some announced themselves as long-lost cousins of Benjamin Wood and rolled out detailed family trees to prove it. Others claimed to be Ida's own kin, tracing their line back to the rich Louisiana father she had always described. Then came the professional heir hunters, men who made a living sniffing out unclaimed fortunes. They would run down anyone with a possible claim and take a cut of whatever they recovered. And then there were the plain frauds, arriving with forged papers and rehearsed tales, betting the confusion might let a good lie pass. The claims did not stop for years. Lawyers filed and refiled. Family trees were drawn up, challenged, and thrown out. What began as a death notice turned into a small industry. It fed attorneys and investigators and hopeful strangers, all of them circling the same pile of money. I find the whole spectacle grimly fascinating. 1,000 strangers shoving one another aside over the savings of a woman most of them had never heard of. They only learned her name when she turned up rich and dead in the papers. The court had never handled anything quite like it. There were more claimants than anyone could check, and mountains of paper to sift through. And at the center sat a woman who could no longer answer a single question. Ida had taken her story into the grave. To the very end, she had either repeated the tale of the Louisiana belle or said nothing at all. So the whole tangle fell to the surrogate's court, the body that decides who inherits what. Its job was to work out which, if any, of those 1,100 stories was true. And here is the part none of them grasped, the part I find almost funny looking back. Nearly every one of them was claiming to be related to a woman who had never existed. Ida Mayfield of Louisiana was not real. She never had been. The father these people traced their blood back to was a character invented in a rented room 70 years earlier. Every family tree that climbed toward a southern planter climbed toward no one. The cousins of Benjamin Wood at least had a real man in their charts. But their tie to the fortune was thin, because the fortune had never truly been his. To find the real heirs, someone would have to do the one thing Ida had worked her whole life to prevent. Someone would have to uncover who she actually was. The servant's daughter. A lie that holds for 70 years still leaves a paper trail. Ida's ran through a single strange letter. The man who finally pieced it together was a lawyer named Joseph Cox, working for the office that handled the estate. He understood something the 1,100 claimants did not. The answer to who Ida really was would not be found in anyone's story. It would be found in documents, in the small, dull records people leave behind whether they mean to or not. So he went through the material brought out of the hotel rooms, and one item stopped him cold. It was a note Benjamin had sent to a priest, years before he died. The subject was Emma, and the way Benjamin spoke of her made no sense if Emma was truly his daughter. Cox read it twice, set it down, and started pulling on the thread. He traced Emma back through the records. In census after census, in every official paper from her years with the Woods, she appeared as their daughter. But a daughter has a birth record. When Cox found Emma's, it said something else. The paper did not name Benjamin and Ida at all. It named two people the Woods had never claimed as family, Thomas and Anne Walsh, and that changed everything. Emma had never been Ida's daughter. She was Ida's sister. That one fact cracked the whole thing open. If Emma was a Walsh, then in all likelihood so was Ida. The elegant Mrs. Wood, the congressman's grand widow, the belle of the Old South, was starting to look like someone else entirely. the Walsh name pulled the investigation across the ocean. Cox had researchers comb the old parish registers in Lancashire, in the north of England. That was the mill country where the Walshes had lived before they ever sailed for America. In the town of Oldham, in a record from 1838, they found her. Not Ida Mayfield. Not some daughter of a southern plantation. A baby girl, baptized Ellen Walsh, born to a poor Irish couple in a town that ran on cotton and coal. When I first read where the trail ended, I had to stop and read it again. The father in the story had never drawn breath, nor had the plantation or the Louisiana childhood she had described in such loving detail, or the line of Scottish nobility. All of it had been built out of thin air in a rented room in New York. The truth ran the other way entirely. She had not come down in the world from a grand estate. She had climbed up out of a mill town. Her father was an Irishman named Thomas Walsh, a labourer who worked with his hands. His family had joined the flood of Irish poor fleeing hunger for America, and they had washed up, unwelcome, in Massachusetts. Ellen had likely passed her early years in service in other people's homes. She watched wealthy families up close, long before she ever reached New York. Even knowing the ending, I find it staggering. The same woman who had waltzed with royalty was born to a man who dug and hauled for his wages. The belle, whose soft Louisiana manner had charmed a whole city, started life with the flat vowels of an English mill town. Behind her lay the shadow of Irish poverty. For 70 years, she had worn a face that was pure invention. Her husband's friends never saw it. The newspapers never saw it. Not one of the fine drawing rooms she conquered ever guessed. Only in death, with the old papers finally laid side by side, did the servant's daughter step out from behind the southern belle. The long circle home. When it was all finally settled, the money went home. After the claims and the counterclaims, after years of lawyers and forged family trees, the court handed the estate to 10 people. Every single one of them was a Walsh. They were the true descendants of Ellen's family, scattered across England, Ireland, and America. Plain working people, a school teacher, a clerk, men and women who earned their living with their hands. None of them had ever heard of the rich old woman in the New York hotel. They were the kind of people Ida had worked 60 years to leave behind. The other 1,100 walked away empty-handed. There is an irony here so complete that I doubt any writer would dare invent it. Ida had organized her entire existence around escaping the Walshes. She erased them from her story and buried them under a made-up Southern family. For decades, she kept her fortune sealed off where no one could reach it. And when it was finally counted out, every dollar landed with the very people she had denied her whole life. For those 10 heirs, in the hardest years of the Depression, the inheritance changed everything. A poor family that had once crossed the ocean in steerage now shared a fortune. It had been built in secret by a relative who refused, to her dying day, to admit they existed. She never had to watch it happen. She was already gone. They buried her in New York, under a plain headstone. The name on it read, Ida Wood. Not the Milltown baby she had been born, and not the Southern belle she had invented. It was the third name, the one she had made for herself and carried for 65 years. Even in the grave, she remained the woman she had built. So what do we make of her, almost a century on? She lied, without pause, for a lifetime. There is no getting around it. She lied about her father, her country, her class, and her own sister. Everyone who thought they knew her, her husband's friends, the society hostesses, the reporters at her door, knew only a character she had written. And yet, there is another way to see her. Here was a person born with nothing, in a time that gave women like her almost no way up. She flatly refused the life she had been handed. She could not inherit a fortune, so she married into one and quietly took it. Barred from society by birth, she forged a berth and charmed her way in. She looked at a game rigged against her and refused to play by its rules. And here is the detail that stays with me most. This was long before New York, when she was still a poor girl with nothing to her name. She paid a fortune teller to read her palm. As Ida told the story, the woman studied her hand and made a promise. She would marry a rich man and get everything she wanted out of life. Ida believed her. She believed it so completely that she walked out and made it come true. That, I think, is the strangest part of the whole story. She did get everything she wanted: the money, the marriage, the escape from the mill town, every bit of it. And she got it so fully and held it so tightly that she ended her days alone in a locked room, a stranger to her own blood, sleeping on a fortune she could never let herself spend. She had walked into a bank once and asked for everything. In a way, that was the story of her whole life. She asked for everything, and she got it. It just left her with nothing else.